8 rejections. That's how many times I watched my promotion slip through my fingers and land in Vanessa Parker's perfectly manicured hands. The CEO's daughter. A woman whose greatest qualification was sharing DNA with the man whose name graced our building. That's what Melissa from finance muttered as she slid a spreadsheet across my desk, her eyes darting toward the glass-walled conference room where champagne was being poured. Again. For someone else's success. My success. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember the way my stomach nodded that morning. The familiar ping of the company-wide email announcing yet another, well-deserved promotion, for Vanessa. The 8th time I'd been passed over. 8 times I'd watched my work, my innovations, my late nights and early mornings vanish into her portfolio like I was nothing more than a ghostwriter for the Parker family legacy. The Parker name was everywhere at Meridian Analytics, embossed on the lobby wall, printed on our business cards, even stamped into the ridiculous ergonomic chairs the executives enjoyed while the rest of us shared desks in the open floor plan. They called collaborative space, but really meant cheaper than walls. Richard Parker had founded the company 30 years ago, but these days his greatest contribution seemed to be his daughter, Vanessa, whose meteoric rise through our data analysis division defied both gravity and merit. I stared at the spreadsheet. Melissa had given me quarterly performance metrics for every project manager in our division. Mine highlighted in green, top revenue generator, highest client satisfaction scores, most successful implementations. Vanessa's in yellow, middle of the pack, with asterisks noting executive adjustments to her final numbers. Maya, you've got to see this, Melissa whispered, tapping a glossy fingernail on the paper where someone had handwritten adjusted for leadership potential next to Vanessa's overall score. Leadership potential. Code for her father runs the company. I didn't look up. Just kept typing my report for next week's client presentation, another project I designed, researched, and structured, which would undoubtedly end up with Vanessa's name on the cover page. The cursor blinked accusingly as I tried to focus through the fog of anger that had become my constant companion. They're celebrating upstairs, Melissa continued, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. The Westlake acquisition team. You know, the one you spent 6 months researching? The data models you built at 3 a.m.? Yeah, that one. Vanessa's giving a champagne toast right now about her vision for integration. The Westlake deal. My Westlake deal. I'd identified the target, built the valuation models, crafted the integration strategy that would combine their machine learning platform with our data infrastructure. I'd even flown to Chicago twice to meet their technical team on my own dime when the travel budget was temporarily frozen, though Vanessa's trip to the London office that same month somehow got approved as essential relationship building. My fingers froze over the keyboard. 6 months of work. Hundreds of hours. The proposal that had been sitting in Richard Parker's inbox for 3 weeks before Vanessa suddenly became interested in expansion opportunities. Now they were celebrating, and I wasn't even invited. Maya? You okay? Melissa's voice softened. She was one of the good ones, been at Meridian even longer than my 5 years, had seen the pattern repeat with others before me. I'm fine, I lied, the words tasting bitter. Just finishing this report. Melissa hesitated, then placed a glossy invitation card on my desk. Thought you might want this. It was on the break room counter. The cream-colored card read, "Join us in celebrating the successful Westlake acquisition and Vanessa Parker's promotion to Executive Vice President of Strategic Integration." The date was today. The time was now. There was a champagne flute watermarked in the background, a perfect metaphor for how transparent their favoritism had become. Thanks, I said, sliding the card into my desk drawer where it joined a growing collection of evidence. Company emails. Meeting notes. Timestamps on documents. A digital paper trail of my work being systematically repurposed under Vanessa's name. After Melissa left, I pulled up my email. There it was, the original Westlake proposal I'd sent to Richard 3 weeks ago. My name on every page. My research. My strategy. My future. I downloaded it again, saved it locally, then checked the shared drive where most team documents lived. Sure enough, there was a new version. Same content, different author, prepared by Vanessa Parker, Senior Director of Strategic Development. The timestamp showed it had been modified yesterday at 8:17 p.m. I wanted to scream. To march upstairs and pour that champagne over Vanessa's cashmere blazer. But I didn't. Not this time. Because this time was different. This time I had a plan. The thing about being overlooked is that eventually, you learn to use it. People who don't see you don't guard themselves around you. They speak freely, leave documents open, forget you're in the room during sensitive conversations. For 5 years, I'd been invisible at Meridian Analytics, just another ambitious woman with an MBA and too many ideas for the boys' club to handle. Now that invisibility was becoming my superpower. 3 months ago, after the 7th rejection, something in me broke, or maybe it finally healed. I'd applied for the Director of Data Integration role, a position I'd been effectively doing for a year already. My performance reviews were stellar. My clients requested me by name. I'd developed a proprietary algorithm that had increased our predictive accuracy by 37%, which was now being marketed as our flagship analytics solution. The rejection email came at 7:30 p.m. on a Friday, cowardly timing designed to avoid confrontation. After careful consideration, other candidates better aligned, wish you continued success. Corporate Mad Libs 4, we're promoting the boss's daughter instead. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That night, alone in my apartment with a bottle of wine and a heart full of rage, I made a decision. I would no longer be the woman they stepped on. I would become the woman they never saw coming. The next morning, I started documenting everything. Every email, every meeting, every report. I created a secure cloud drive where I stored original versions of my work before they were modified and claimed by others. I recorded meetings on my phone, legal in our state as long as one party was aware of the recording. That party was me. I carefully built relationships with clients, making myself indispensable to their success. I volunteered for the difficult projects, the ones no one else wanted because they were too complex or too risky. I worked harder than ever, but now with purpose. I wasn't just building a career, I was building a case. And most importantly, I started reaching out to competitors. Subtly, professionally, always at industry events or conferences where networking was expected. Never leaving a digital trail. Never explicitly discussing opportunities. Just making connections, establishing my reputation outside the Parker empire. One of those connections was Eliana Reyes, CEO of Catalyst Data Systems, Meridian's fastest-growing competitor. We'd met at a Women in Tech conference where I'd presented my research on predictive modeling in healthcare outcomes, research Meridian had declined to publish because it wasn't aligned with our current market strategy. Eliana had asked insightful questions, handed me her card, and said, "We should talk sometime." I kept that card in my wallet, a talisman of possibility I wasn't yet ready to embrace. Until now. The celebration upstairs continued as I returned to my report, typing calmly while rage and resolve crystallized into something harder, sharper, more dangerous than mere anger. My phone buzzed with a text from Ben in IT, another ally who'd been passed over repeatedly for promotion. FYI, Parker just announced VE is taking over Westlake Integration. Threw your name in as supporting analyst. Direct quote, Maya will handle the technical details while Vanessa focuses on strategic vision. Thought you should know. Supporting analyst. 5 years of education, 7 years in the industry, countless late nights and working weekends, and I was supporting someone who couldn't build a basic regression model without calling IT for help. I texted back a simple, "Thanks for the heads up," while my other hand opened my personal email and began composing a message to Eliana Reyes. The company refrigerator hummed in our kitchenette, covered in baby shower announcements and takeout menus. Next to it hung a framed poster of Meridian's values: integrity, excellence, innovation, vision. Words that had once inspired me, now mocking me daily with their hollowness. Thomas from legal walked past, nodding absently, his attention on his phone. Then he stopped, backed up 2 steps, and looked at me with something like pity. "Oh, Maya. Didn't see you there. You, working on the Westlake materials?" "Just finishing some documentation," I replied, neutral, professional, as if I hadn't just been stabbed in the back for the 8th time. He hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "Listen, I'm sure you've heard about Vanessa's promotion. The board voted yesterday. Unanimous, apparently." He lowered his voice. "For what it's worth, I think everyone knows who really did the work on this one. Everyone knows. Yet no one does anything. The Meridian way. Thanks, Thomas. I appreciate that." My voice was steady, betraying none of the calculation happening behind my practiced smile. "How's Dana? Still enjoying the new house?" I asked, redirecting to his wife, their recent purchase. He brightened, guilt momentarily assuaged by my apparent acceptance of the situation. "She loves it. Especially the home office. Hey, we should have you over for dinner sometime." "I'd like that," I lied, knowing the invitation would never materialize. It never did. The sympathy offerings at Meridian were as transactional as everything else. As Thomas walked away, I returned to my email to Eliana. Carefully worded. Professional. Not explicitly asking for a job, not yet. Simply suggesting a coffee to discuss mutual interests in the healthcare analytics sector. Plausible deniability was still important. I hadn't made my move yet. I hit send, then checked the time. The celebration would be winding down soon. Which meant Vanessa would be making her victory lap through the office, collecting congratulations like they were designer handbags, compulsively and without any real need for more. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, the elevator doors opened, and out she came, surrounded by a small entourage of executives and assistants. Vanessa Parker, newly minted executive VP, 31 years old with 3 years of actual work experience and a lifetime of privilege. Her blonde hair was expensively highlighted, her navy suit impeccably tailored, her smile practiced to perfect inoffensiveness. I kept typing as the group approached, their voices carrying across the open office. Vanessa was explaining her vision for the Westlake integration, point by point, almost verbatim from the strategy document I'd created in April. Maya. Vanessa's voice rang with artificial warmth as she stopped by my desk. There's our analytics guru. I was just telling the team how much I'll be relying on your technical expertise for Westlake. I looked up, my face a careful mask of professional courtesy. Congratulations on your promotion, Vanessa. I'm looking forward to supporting the integration. The words were acid on my tongue. We should sync up tomorrow, she continued, barely listening to my response. I have some thoughts on how we might adjust the implementation timeline. My timeline. My implementation plan. Now her thoughts. Of course, I replied. Just send me a calendar invite when you're free. She beamed, mission accomplished, the appearance of collaboration established in front of witnesses. Perfect. I knew I could count on you, Maya. You're such a team player. Team player. The corporate equivalent of good dog. Sit. Stay. Watch someone else take credit for your work. Good girl. As the entourage moved on, I noticed Richard Parker himself hanging back, watching the exchange. The CEO rarely ventured to our floor. At 65, he had the confident bearing of a man who'd never questioned his right to occupy any space he chose. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his custom suit unwrinkled despite the late afternoon hour. He approached my desk after Vanessa. And the others had moved on, stopping closer than was comfortable, asserting dominance through proximity. Maya. Good work on the Westlake research. Vanessa speaks highly of your attention to detail. My attention to detail. As if I were a proofreader, not the architect of the entire strategy. I stood, refusing to look up at him from a seated position. Thank you, Mr. Parker. I'm very invested in the success of this acquisition. He nodded, studying me with calculating eyes that missed nothing. Richard Parker hadn't built a data empire by being unobservant. Vanessa tells me you've been quite helpful to her in preparing for this new role. We appreciate that kind of team mentality at Meridian. Translation: we appreciate you not making a fuss while we give your work to my daughter. I'm committed to Meridian's success, I replied carefully. Not a lie. Just not the whole truth about what success might look like. Good, good. He glanced at my computer screen, then back to me. You know, Maya, you've been with us what, for years now? 5 years and 3 months, Mr. Parker. Right, right. Well, we value longevity here. Keep up the good work, and who knows where you might end up. He smiled, the benevolent dictator offering false hope to the peasantry. I'm counting on it, sir, I responded, and this time, I didn't have to fake my smile. Because I was counting on it, just not in the way he assumed. After Parker left, I sat back down, heart pounding despite my outward calm. The CEO rarely spoke to anyone below VP level. The fact that he'd made a point to speak to me, to emphasize Vanessa's role and my supporting position, told me everything I needed to know. They were worried. They should be. My phone pinged with an email notification. Eliana Reyes had responded already. Coffee sounds wonderful. How about tomorrow, 8 a.m., at Reverie Cafe on 7th? Looking forward to hearing more about your healthcare analytics work. Tomorrow. Before Vanessa's meeting to adjust my implementation timeline. Perfect timing. I glanced around the office, at the rows of desks where people stared at screens, trapped in the glow of artificial light and artificial opportunities. For 5 years, this had been my battlefield, my proving ground, my prison. How many late nights had I spent here, believing that excellence would eventually be recognized? How many times had I swallowed my rage when watching someone else, usually Vanessa, take credit for my innovations? 8 rejections. 8 times I'd been told I wasn't quite ready, wasn't quite right, wasn't quite enough. But they had never rejected my work, they'd just redistributed it to someone with the right last name. As I gathered my things to leave, I received another email. This one from HR, a company-wide announcement confirming Vanessa's promotion and her new role leading the Westlake integration. Attached was an updated organizational chart showing her elevated position, with several roles reporting to her, including mine. My job title had been changed from Senior Data Strategist to Technical Analytics Support. A demotion, wrapped in an announcement celebrating someone else's unearned advancement. The final insult. I printed the email, added it to my growing file of evidence, and shut down my computer. Tomorrow would be a new day. Tomorrow, I would meet with Eliana Reyes and begin the next phase of my plan. Tomorrow, I would stop being the woman they overlooked and start being the woman they wished they'd never underestimated. Because the thing about being rejected 8 times is that you eventually stop seeking approval and start planning revenge. Not the petty, emotional kind that burns bright and fast, but the calculating, strategic kind that changes everything forever. As I walked past the Meridian Analytics logo in the lobby, that pretentious silver M that resembled nothing so much as a mountain with the peak reserved for the chosen few, I made a silent promise to myself. This would be the last time I crossed this threshold as a victim. The next time I entered this building, it would be on my terms. Outside, the evening air was cool against my skin, a welcome relief from the stifling politics of the office. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter already, energized by purpose rather than depleted by frustration. My phone buzzed with another text from Ben in IT. You still here? Emergency request from VP office to transfer all Westlake files to V's private server. Need access to your drive. I smiled as I typed my response, already left for the day. Handle it tomorrow? Thanks. Tomorrow would be too late. By tomorrow, the evidence would be secured where neither Ben nor Vanessa nor Richard Parker himself could erase it. By tomorrow, the pieces of my plan would be in motion. 8 rejections had taught me patience. Had taught me strategy. Had taught me that playing by their rules would never result in victory. So I'd created my own rulebook now. And the first rule was simple: those who cannot win the game must change it entirely. I walked to my car, mentally reviewing my preparation for tomorrow's meeting with Eliana. The secure drive with 5 years of evidence. The client contact list I'd carefully cultivated. The algorithms I'd developed, my algorithms, regardless of whose name Meridian had slapped on them. And most importantly, the comprehensive breakdown of the Westlake integration strategy, with documented proof of its original authorship. 8 rejections. This would be my response. And it would shock not just the board, but the entire industry. Reverie Cafe was morning quiet when I arrived, just the hiss of espresso machines and low murmurs from early meetings. I'd chosen a corner table with my back to the wall, laptop open to display the Meridian logo as a signal to Eliana. Old habits of corporate territoriality die hard, even when you're planning to burn the territory down. I was 15 minutes early, but Eliana Reyes was already there, nursing a court-a-due and reviewing something on her tablet. She looked up as I approached, her dark eyes sharp with intelligence. No wonder Catalyst data had grown 300% under her leadership. Maya Jindal. She stood, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, confident. I've been looking forward to this. That's because most executives don't bother to understand the technical foundations of their business. They're too busy playing corporate politics to learn how their products actually work. The barb wasn't subtle. She knew exactly where I worked and who my bosses were. The Parker's reputation for prioritizing appearances over substance was apparently industry-wide. Speaking of your conference presentation, she continued, I was surprised to see it wasn't featured in Meridian's spring catalog. That research could transform preventative care protocols. I sipped my coffee, buying time to frame my response carefully. Meridian has a specific vision for their healthcare vertical. My research didn't align with current priorities. Their loss, Eliana said, watching me with calculation that matched my own. At Catalyst, we believe innovation drives the market, not the other way around. We would have built an entire product line around that algorithm. The invitation wasn't explicit, but it hung in the air between us, tempting and dangerous. I hadn't come here to simply jump ship to a competitor. I had bigger plans. Meridian has many strengths, I said diplomatically. But yes, there are opportunities they've missed. The healthcare predictive model is just one example. And the Westlake acquisition? Is that another example of Meridian's vision? Eliana asked, arching an eyebrow. My pulse quickened. She was well informed. You've heard about that. It's my job to know what my competitors are doing, she replied with a small shrug. Especially when they make moves into markets we're actively developing. The integration of Westlake's machine learning platform with established data infrastructure could be groundbreaking. She paused. If executed correctly. If, I agreed, letting the weight of that word hang between us. Eliana leaned forward slightly. Maya, let me be direct. I've followed your work for some time. Your research publications, your conference presentations. You're consistently ahead of the curve. Yet somehow, you remain in the same position at Meridian while less qualified individuals advance. One individual in particular. The directness was refreshing after years of corporate doublespeak. You seem well informed about Meridian's organizational structure as well. As I said, it's my job. She set down her cup. Here's what else I know. Whoever developed Meridian's strategy for Westlake understands both the technical architecture and market positioning in a way that few analysts do. That person sees the whole chessboard, not just the next move. Her eyes held mine. That person should be leading the integration, not supporting it. I felt exposed, seen in a way I hadn't been at Meridian for 5 years. It was both unsettling and exhilarating. What exactly are you proposing, Eliana? That depends on what you want, she countered. A lateral move to Catalyst with better compensation? A leadership role with actual authority? Or something else entirely? She studied me intently. Because I suspect you didn't reach out just for better stock options. She was right. I hadn't come here merely seeking escape. I wanted justice. Vindication. And yes, a little righteous retribution for 8 rejections and countless stolen ideas. I have a proposition, I said carefully. One that could potentially benefit both of us, though it comes with certain ethical complexities. Eliana's lips curved slightly. The most interesting propositions usually do. I opened my bag and removed a USB drive, placing it on the table between us. This contains evidence of systematic intellectual property misappropriation at Meridian Analytics. 5 years of documentation showing my work being claimed by others, primarily Vanessa Parker. It includes the complete Westlake acquisition strategy, my strategy, with timestamped proof of original authorship. Eliana didn't reach for the drive. And what exactly do you expect me to do with this information? Nothing yet, I replied. Consider it insurance. What I'm proposing is a collaboration. Meridian is positioning the Westlake integration as revolutionary, but their implementation plan has critical flaws, deliberately introduced by me in the final version I submitted to leadership. Her eyebrows rose slightly. Sabotage from within? Quality control, I corrected. The flaws are subtle. They'll only become apparent during implementation, at which point the integration will falter. Not catastrophically, but enough to create significant market vulnerability and client dissatisfaction. And you're sharing this because? Because in 3 months, when those flaws emerge, I want Catalyst to be ready with a superior solution. My solution. The correct implementation strategy that I never gave to Meridian. Understanding dawned in Eliana's eyes. A coordinated market response. We swoop in when Meridian stumbles. Precisely. Clients will be frustrated but not yet ready to completely abandon their investment. They'll be looking for someone to fix the integration issues. That's when Catalyst approaches with exactly the right solution at exactly the right time. And you'd spearhead this for us? I nodded. As a consultant initially. I have terms. Of course you do, Eliana said with newfound respect. Let's hear them. First, I stay at Meridian through the initial Westlake implementation. I need to monitor the process, ensure the timeline unfolds as predicted. Second, when I do join Catalyst, it's as VP of Strategic Integration, with equity and board visibility. Third, when the story breaks, and it will break, Catalyst acknowledges me publicly as the architect of the solution. My name, my innovation, my vision. Eliana considered this, tapping one manicured nail against her cup. The first 2 are straightforward. The third has complications. There could be legal issues if we're too explicit about your role at Meridian. I'm not asking you to mention Meridian. Just to acknowledge me as the creator of the solution Catalyst provides. The connection will be obvious to industry insiders without explicitly stating it. She nodded slowly. And the ethics of deliberately allowing a flawed implementation to proceed? The flaws won't compromise client data or security, I assured her. They're architectural inefficiencies that will result in system latency and integration gaps. Frustrating but not dangerous. And let's be clear, if Meridian had the right person leading the implementation, those flaws would be spotted immediately. The fact that they won't be discovered is proof of my point. That the wrong people are in charge, Eliana concluded. Exactly. She sat back, studying me with new appreciation. You've thought this through thoroughly. I've had 5 years and 8 rejections to perfect the plan. Eliana picked up the USB drive, turning it over in her fingers thoughtfully. I'll need to review this and discuss certain aspects with my legal team, discreetly, of course. Of course. In the meantime, she continued, I'd like to see your corrected implementation strategy. The one Meridian doesn't have. I smiled. I brought that too. But that information doesn't leave this table until we have an agreement. Cautious. Good. She set the drive down. Maya, can I ask you something personal? I tensed slightly but nodded. Why now? You've clearly been overlooked for years. What changed? The question hit closer to home than I expected. Why had I tolerated the situation for so long? The 8th rejection was the breaking point, but the pattern had been established years ago. I believed in meritocracy, I admitted. I thought excellence would eventually be recognized and rewarded. I was wrong. Excellence doesn't matter in a system designed to protect privilege. I met her gaze steadily. But I've learned that if you can't succeed within a corrupt system, you have to create consequences for that corruption. Eliana nodded slowly. Consequences indeed. She pulled out her phone, checking the time. I have a board meeting at 10. Can you send me the detailed version of your proposal by end of day? Include your terms, timeline, and compensation requirements. Yes. Good. She stood, extending her hand again. Maya, regardless of what happens next, I want you to know that I admire your strategic thinking. It's rare to find someone who plays the long game so patiently. As we said our goodbyes, I felt a weight lifting. For the first time in years, my work had been truly seen, my value recognized without qualification or diminishment. Whether or not Eliana ultimately accepted my proposal, I had reclaimed something essential, my professional dignity. I was halfway back to Meridian when my phone buzzed with a calendar invite from Vanessa. Subject, Westlake Integration Kickoff, Strategy Alignment. Time, 10:30 a.m. Location, Executive Conference Room. Required attendees, all integration team. Members and department heads. Perfect timing. The chess pieces were moving exactly as anticipated. The executive conference room at Meridian was designed to intimidate, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a massive mahogany table that seated 20, and screens built into the walls for presentations. It was Richard Parker's favorite stage for corporate theater, and today's performance was already underway when I arrived precisely on time. Vanessa stood at the head of the table, gesturing at a slide deck displayed on the main screen. Her navy suit had been replaced by a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Richard sat to her right, watching with paternal pride as she outlined her vision for the Westlake integration. We'll revolutionize our ability to deliver predictive insights across multiple sectors, she was saying as I slipped into a seat at the far end of the table. The true innovation lies in how we'll synchronize their machine learning platform with our proprietary data infrastructure. My words. Verbatim from page 12 of my proposal. I opened my laptop and began taking notes, not of Vanessa's presentation, but of each instance where she claimed my work as her own. The room was full of department heads and senior managers, all nodding along, either oblivious to the theft or complicit in their silence. Maya. Vanessa suddenly called out, spotting me at the end of the table. Perfect timing. I was just explaining the integration architecture. Maybe you could walk the team through the technical details of how we'll manage the API connections? A test. She was checking whether I'd fall in line, play my assigned supporting role in her production. All eyes turned to me, including Richard's. His gaze sharp with warning. I smiled pleasantly. I'd be happy to. I stood, moving to the front of the room as Vanessa reluctantly ceded her position at the head of the table. This was a calculated risk. I needed to maintain my position at Meridian until the plan fully unfolded, which meant appearing cooperative. But I also needed to establish my expertise, to plant seeds of doubt about Vanessa's understanding of the project she was supposedly leading. The integration architecture has 3 critical components, I began, pulling up the technical diagrams I'd created months ago. First, the data migration pathway, which must preserve the relational integrity of existing client datasets. Second, the API framework that will allow bidirectional communication between our analytics engine and Westlake's machine learning models. And third, the user interface reconciliation to ensure consistent experience across the platform. I clicked through each diagram methodically, explaining the complex technical underpinnings in terms clear enough for the non-technical executives to grasp. With each slide, I could see Vanessa's smile becoming more strained, her posture more rigid. I wasn't using any of the simplified talking points she'd prepared. Instead, I was demonstrating a depth of knowledge she couldn't hope to match. The most significant challenge, I continued, reaching the critical point, will be managing latency during the initial synchronization phase. As Vanessa's strategy outlines, we'll be implementing a staged approach to minimize disruption. I deliberately emphasized Vanessa's strategy, catching her eye with a look of innocent collegial support. She looked momentarily confused, then nodded quickly, claiming ownership of a complex technical approach she clearly didn't understand. That's right, she jumped in, eager to reassert control. My strategy prioritizes client experience during the transition. Absolutely, I agreed smoothly. And perhaps you could explain your thinking behind the decision to use parallel processing for the initial data migration rather than sequential batching? Some of the team might find that rationale helpful. It was a trap, and she walked right into it. The implementation plan actually called for sequential batching, not parallel processing. The question was designed to expose her lack of understanding, but subtly enough that I maintained plausible deniability. Vanessa faltered, just for a moment, but long enough for several of the technical managers to notice. Well, that is, the efficiency gains from parallel processing are obvious when you consider the volume of data involved. A technically accurate but completely irrelevant answer that revealed she had no idea what the implementation plan actually specified. I nodded encouragingly. Interesting approach. That's different from what was in the documentation I reviewed, but I'm sure there were updates I haven't seen yet. I'd love to discuss the technical implications offline. Confusion flickered across her face. Yes, let's sync up on that later. Richard Parker cleared his throat, clearly sensing the shift in dynamics. Let's move on to timeline and staffing. Vanessa, you were outlining the team structure? I returned to my seat, mission accomplished. I'd planted the first seed of doubt while maintaining the appearance of helpful collaboration. Already I could see puzzled looks being exchanged among the technical managers, silent questions about who really understood this integration. The meeting continued for another hour, with Vanessa regaining her confidence as she moved to topics that required less technical knowledge. When it finally ended, people began filing out, conversations already forming about action items and next steps. Richard Parker intercepted me before I could leave. Maya, a word. Not a request. An order. I followed him to his office, a corner suite with views in 2 directions and art that probably cost more than my annual salary. He closed the door behind us, his expression unreadable. That was an interesting exchange in there, he said, moving behind his desk but not sitting, maintaining the height advantage. I'm not sure what you were trying to accomplish. I kept my expression neutral. Just providing the technical details as Vanessa requested. The team needs to understand the architecture to implement it successfully. He studied me, years of corporate battle making him sensitive to threats, even if he couldn't quite identify the nature of this one. You know, Maya, Vanessa speaks very highly of your technical skills. She specifically requested you for her team. Translation: my daughter knows you're valuable but potentially dangerous, so she's keeping you close. I'm committed to the project's success, I replied. True, if incomplete. Good. Because loyalty is essential at Meridian. We reward team players who support our leadership vision. His emphasis on loyalty wasn't subtle. 8 years at the company has taught me a lot about Meridian's values, I said, the slight inaccuracy deliberate. Let him correct me. 5 years, he said automatically, then caught himself. Though that's still impressive tenure in today's market. 5 years, 3 months, and 14 days, I clarified with a smile. But who's counting? He didn't return the smile. Maya, I'll be direct. You're valuable to this company. Your technical skills are exceptional. But leadership requires more than technical excellence. It requires judgment, discretion, and yes, loyalty. Like supporting colleagues even when they present incorrect information? I asked, voice innocent but words pointed. His eyes narrowed. Like understanding that success is a team effort, not an individual achievement. Vanessa has a strategic vision for this integration that transcends the technical details. I see. I let silence stretch between us, refusing to fill it with reassurances or apologies. Finally, he sighed. Look, I know you were disappointed about the EVP position. Your application was strong. But Vanessa brings a unique perspective that the board felt was crucial at this juncture. A unique perspective, I repeated. I understand completely. He seemed relieved at my apparent acceptance. I'm glad. And let me assure you, your contributions are valued. In fact, I've approved a 10% raise for you effective immediately, in recognition of your importance to the Westlake project. A bribe, thinly disguised as recognition. 10% to accept continued exploitation. That's very generous, I said, knowing the raise would be irrelevant in 3 months when my plan came to fruition. We take care of our key people at Meridian, he said, relaxing slightly, believing he'd neutralized whatever threat I might pose. Now, I'm sure you have plenty to do to support Vanessa's implementation timeline. Dismissed. I nodded respectfully. And left his office, my face betraying none of the calculation happening behind it. Richard Parker thought he'd just secured my loyalty with a modest raise and vague acknowledgement. In reality, he just confirmed everything I already knew about how Meridian operated: rewards for compliance, advancement by birthright, and a fundamental inability to recognize the difference between appeasement and allegiance. Back at my desk, I found a message from Eliana: reviewed your materials. Impressive documentation. Legal has concerns but sees potential. Dinner tonight, 8 p.m., Helene's. We'll discuss terms. Helene's was one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, far from Meridian's offices and the usual corporate haunts. A strategic choice for a sensitive conversation. As I confirmed the dinner, Vanessa appeared at my desk, her smile tight around the edges. Maya, great job in there. Just wanted to touch base about that parallel processing question. I think there might have been some confusion. Oh? I looked up with professional interest. I thought I might have misunderstood something. She lowered her voice. The implementation plan was updated yesterday. I should have made sure you had the latest version. My assistant will send it over. A lie, but a telling one. She was scrambling to cover her ignorance by claiming changes that didn't exist. That would be helpful, thank you, I replied. I want to make sure I'm supporting your vision accurately. She seemed relieved at my apparent cooperation. That's what I appreciate about you, Maya. Always detail-oriented. She hesitated, then added, my father mentioned he spoke with you. I hope you know how valued you are on this team. 10% more valued, apparently, I said with a small smile. She laughed, a practiced sound. Well deserved. This project is going to be transformative for Meridian, and for all of our careers. On that point, at least, we agreed. The afternoon passed in a flurry of meetings and emails, all centered around the Westlake implementation. I participated actively, offering insights and raising occasional questions that subtly highlighted gaps in Vanessa's understanding. Nothing confrontational, nothing that could be interpreted as sabotage, just enough to create a pattern that observant team members would notice. By 6, the office had mostly emptied. I remained, finalizing my proposal for Eliana and making a copy of the latest Westlake documents, insurance against any attempts to lock me out of the project. As I worked, I noticed a light still on in the legal department. Thomas was working late, visible through the glass partition that separated his office from the main floor. On impulse, I walked over, knocking lightly on his door frame. He looked up, surprised. Maya, burning the midnight oil? Just wrapping up some Westlake documentation. You're here late too. He sighed, gesturing to the stacks of papers on his desk. Acquisition compliance review. Making sure we've covered all the regulatory bases before the integration begins. I nodded sympathetically. Sounds tedious but essential. That could be legal's department motto, he joked wearily. Then, more seriously, listen, about this morning's announcement, that was handled poorly. A lot of us thought you should have gotten that promotion. A lot of us, I repeated. But not the ones who make decisions. He looked uncomfortable. The board dynamics are complicated. Not that complicated, I countered. The CEO's daughter gets preferential treatment. Seems pretty straightforward. Thomas glanced around nervously, though we were alone. Maya, be careful. That kind of talk is factually accurate? He sighed. Is career limiting. Look, I get your frustration. But Meridian is still one of the top firms in the industry. There will be other opportunities. 8 rejections, Thomas. 8 promotions I was qualified for that went to less experienced candidates. At what point does keep trying become self-delusion? He had no answer for that. Anyway, I continued, I should let you get back to your compliance review. I just wanted to say hello. As I turned to leave, he called after me. Maya? For what it's worth, your technical overview today was impressive. Several board members noticed the disparity in understanding. I paused. Interesting. I wasn't aware board members were present. Video conference, he explained. The board is closely monitoring this integration. It represents nearly 30% of our projected growth for the next fiscal year. Valuable information. The board's attention meant higher stakes, more scrutiny, and potentially more dramatic fallout when the flaws in the implementation became apparent. Well, hopefully the updated documentation Vanessa mentioned will clear up any confusion, I said innocently. Thomas frowned. Updated documentation? She said the implementation plan was revised yesterday. Something about switching to parallel processing for data migration? He looked genuinely puzzled. That's not. I just reviewed the final documentation this morning. There was no mention of parallel processing. Perhaps it's still being updated then. I shrugged, as if it were of minor importance. I'm sure Vanessa knows what she's doing. I left him looking troubled, exactly as intended. Another seed planted, this one potentially more damaging. If legal was reviewing documentation that contradicted what Vanessa had claimed in the meeting, questions would inevitably arise about who actually understood the implementation strategy. By the time I arrived at Helene's that evening, the chessboard was set. Pieces were in motion at Meridian, doubt about Vanessa's competence, increased board scrutiny of the implementation, and my own position carefully calibrated between valuable resource and potential problem. Now it was time to secure my exit. Strategy. Eliana was already seated at a corner table, reviewing documents on her tablet. She looked up as I approached, her expression revealing nothing as she gestured to the chair across from her. Maya. Right on time. I've taken the liberty of ordering wine. I sat down, noting that she'd positioned herself to see the entire restaurant. A habit of successful executives, always aware of their surroundings, always watching for opportunities and threats. I've reviewed your proposal, she said without preamble. And your evidence. It's compelling. But? I prompted, hearing the reservation in her voice. But there are complications. Legal concerns about the appearance of corporate espionage. Timing issues with our current product roadmap. Resource allocation questions. I maintained a neutral expression. All anticipated in my proposal. The staged approach minimizes legal exposure, the timeline aligns with Meridian's implementation schedule, and I've outlined the minimal resources needed for initial development. She smiled slightly. You really don't miss details, do you? That's why I should have been leading the Westlake integration, not supporting it. On that, we completely agree. She tapped her tablet, bringing up a document. I've drafted a preliminary agreement based on your terms, with some modifications. She slid the tablet across to me. I reviewed it carefully, noting the changes. The consulting arrangement was structured as I'd proposed, with a clear path to the VP position. The compensation package was actually more generous than I'd requested, with additional equity incentives tied to the success of what they were calling Project Renaissance. The public acknowledgement clause had been carefully worded to minimize legal exposure while ensuring I would be recognized as the architect of the solution. And there was an additional clause I hadn't expected, a seat on Catalyst's Innovation Council, the group that set long-term product strategy. This is quite comprehensive, I said, genuinely impressed. Catalyst values talent appropriately, Eliana replied. Something Meridian has failed to do for 5 years. 8 times, to be precise. I looked up sharply. You've done your research. Of course I have. I needed to understand what motivates you. Revenge? Ambition? Recognition? She studied me intently. All of the above, I suspect, but in what proportion? It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself many times during the long nights planning this strategy. Justice, I said finally. I want the right people recognized for the right work. I want merit to matter more than nepotism. I want consequences for those who build careers by standing on the shoulders of others. Eliana nodded slowly. Then, we understand each other. Because I didn't build Catalyst by promoting people based on their last names. I built it by recognizing talent, regardless of pedigree. She gestured to the agreement on the tablet. Do we have a deal? I took a moment, considering the weight of this decision. There would be no going back once I signed. I would be committed to the plan, to the carefully orchestrated downfall of Meridian's Westlake integration and Vanessa's leadership credibility. Yes, I said finally. We have a deal. Eliana smiled, satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. Then let's order dinner and discuss next steps. We have a revolution to plan. The next morning, I arrived at Meridian with new purpose, a silent clock ticking in my mind. 72 days until the Westlake integration would begin to falter. 72 days of careful performance, maintaining my position while secretly laying groundwork for what would come after. My phone buzzed with a text from Eliana, agreement processed. Legal documents arriving via secure courier by end of day. Renaissance begins. Project Renaissance. The code name felt appropriate, a rebirth, a cultural shift, the dawn of a new era after a long dark age. I tucked my phone away as Melissa approached, coffee in hand and concern in her eyes. Everything okay? You seem different today. Her voice lowered. After yesterday's announcement, I thought you might call in sick. I smiled, the expression genuine for the first time in months. I'm better than okay, Melissa. Sometimes clarity is the greatest gift. She studied me with friendly suspicion. Clarity, huh? Does clarity have anything to do with you absolutely owning that technical presentation yesterday? Because the whole department is talking about it. Is that so? I kept my tone casual while satisfaction bloomed inside me. Oh, Yeah. Raj from engineering said Vanessa looked like she was trying to explain quantum physics after watching half a YouTube video. Melissa's grin was conspiratorial. And Thomas from legal was asking questions about implementation documentation this morning. Very specific questions. Seeds sprouting faster than anticipated. Good. I'm just focused on making the integration successful, I said diplomatically. Speaking of which, I should get to the project kickoff meeting. The Westlake implementation team had been assembled in conference room C, a windowless space, with uncomfortable chairs and flickering fluorescent lights. A clear step down from yesterday's executive showcase, and a telling indication of where the actual work would happen. I took a seat near the back as Vanessa entered, flanked by two junior analysts who carried her materials like courtiers attending royalty. Her smile was bright, but her eyes were wary as she spotted me. "Good morning, team," she began with manufactured enthusiasm. The team, mostly engineers, data architects, and project managers, listened with professional attention, though I noticed several exchanging glances when she glossed over implementation specifics. "Now, I've created an organizational structure to ensure smooth execution," she continued, displaying a slide with a hierarchy chart. At the top was Vanessa as executive lead, with various team leaders below her. My name appeared in a small box labeled Technical Advisory, not even a leadership position, but a consulting role outside the main command structure. A deliberate sidelining. If I'd still been invested in my Meridian career, it would have been a devastating demotion. Instead, it was perfect for my purposes. Less direct responsibility meant more freedom to monitor without being held accountable for the eventual problems. I've prepared detailed role descriptions for each position. Vanessa continued, distributing folders. "Maya, I'd like you to focus on API framework documentation and interface recommendations. Your technical background makes you ideal for translating complex requirements into actionable specifications. Translation: stay in the background writing technical documents no one in leadership would read." "Happy to help," I replied pleasantly. "Will I still have access to the implementation server for testing integration points?" A technical but crucial question. Without server access, I couldn't monitor the integration process or document the emerging flaws. Vanessa hesitated, clearly unsure of the technical implications. "I think that makes sense. Martin, you're handling server configurations, correct? Can you make sure Maya has appropriate access?" Martin, the infrastructure lead, nodded. Already on the access list from the planning phase. She designed most of the integration pathways. An uncomfortable truth Vanessa couldn't dispute without revealing her ignorance. Of course. Maya's technical contributions have been valuable. Let's build on that foundation. The meeting continued with task assignments and timeline discussions. I participated minimally, asking occasional clarifying questions that served my dual purpose, appearing cooperative while documenting the decisions that would eventually lead to failure. As the team dispersed, Vanessa caught up with me in the hallway. "Maya, do you have a moment?" I followed her to a small breakout room, noting the tension in her shoulders. She closed the door and turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I wanted to check in personally. I know yesterday's announcement might have been disappointing for you." The understatement was almost comical. I maintained a neutral expression. "Congratulations again on your promotion. I'm sure you'll bring a unique perspective to the role." She either missed or ignored the subtle barb. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss. Your technical expertise is invaluable to this project. I couldn't do it without you." Finally, something true. "Which is why," she continued, "I'd like to offer you the opportunity to co-present with me at the client kickoff next week. The Westlake executives will be here, and they'll have technical questions I'd appreciate your help addressing." Interesting. Not a genuine olive branch, but a recognition that she couldn't fake technical knowledge in front of the client. She needed me visible for that specific purpose. Then back to the shadows. "I'd be happy to support the presentation," I agreed. "Will we be using the technical slides I prepared for the initial proposal?" "Yes, those were excellent." She relaxed slightly, believing she'd secured my cooperation. "Perhaps we could review them together beforehand? I want to make sure I'm fully prepared for any questions." A crash course in her own supposed area of expertise. Desperate and transparent. "Of course. Shall we schedule a prep session?" "Perfect." Her smile turned genuine with relief. "And Maya, I know there have been some misunderstandings about the project leadership. I want you to know that I value your contributions. In fact, I've spoken with my father about creating a technical director role for you after this implementation succeeds. Not a formal promotion yet, but a step in that direction." The empty promise was so predictable I almost laughed. A vague future title with no guaranteed authority or compensation increase, the corporate equivalent of telling a child they might get ice cream someday if they behave. That's thoughtful of you, I replied, the deliberate ambiguity of my response going unnoticed as she grasped at perceived alliance. We women need to support each other in this industry, she added with sisterly conviction that might have been convincing if she hadn't spent years climbing over me to reach her current position. Absolutely, I agreed, thinking of Eliana Reyes. And our very different approach to female solidarity, one based on recognition of merit rather than exploitation packaged as empowerment. After Vanessa left, I returned to my desk and found an email from Martin, the infrastructure lead, copying me on server access protocols for the integration environment. Attached was the preliminary testing schedule and technical specifications. Crucial information for monitoring the implementation process. I forwarded the email to my personal account using Meridian's external sharing function, which automatically logged the transaction. No subterfuge necessary, everything done through official channels, with the legitimate purpose of working remotely. The digital equivalent of hiding in plain sight. By lunchtime, whispers about yesterday's technical presentation had evolved into open discussion. I overheard two data engineers talking as they waited for the elevator. Just strange that she couldn't answer basic questions about her own implementation plan, one was saying. Maybe she's more big picture focused, the other suggested diplomatically. The big picture is built from the details. If she doesn't understand parallel versus sequential processing for data migration, how can she lead the integration? The doors opened, their conversation continuing as they entered. The seeds of doubt were germinating faster than I'd anticipated. Vanessa's technical limitations were becoming apparent to the people who would actually implement the project, a potentially significant complication for her leadership credibility. Back at my desk, I found a sealed envelope marked confidential in my inbox. Inside was a thumb drive and a simple note on Catalyst letterhead, Project Renaissance documentation. Review and confirm. The promised legal documents from Eliana. I slipped both into my bag, planning to review them at home where privacy was assured. As I did, I noticed Richard Parker watching from the hallway outside his office, his expression unreadable. He nodded slightly in acknowledgement before turning away. The afternoon brought a flurry of Westlake-related meetings, technical specifications, timeline planning, resource allocations. I participated actively in each, positioning myself as helpful and engaged while carefully documenting every decision. In my own parallel notes. Each meeting revealed more clearly that Vanessa was struggling with the technical complexity, relying heavily on team leads to explain concepts she should have mastered months ago. By 5 o'clock, the implementation team had settled into their roles, with daily stand-ups scheduled and work streams assigned. I had been effectively sidelined from decision-making while maintaining access to all the information I needed, exactly as planned. As the office emptied, I remained, using the quiet time to document the day's developments and update my timeline. The secure courier Eliana had mentioned arrived at 6, requiring my signature for a package containing the formal consulting agreement with Catalyst. I was reviewing the terms when my phone buzzed with a notification from the company message board. A new announcement had been posted, Westlake Client Kickoff, attendee list and agenda. I opened it, curious about which Westlake executives would be attending. The agenda listed a technical overview presentation with both Vanessa and me as presenters, as she'd promised earlier. But it was the attendee list that caught my attention. Among the Westlake representatives was a name I recognized, Dr. Sanjay Mehta, Chief Technology Officer. I'd met him at the same conference where I'd encountered Eliana, though we'd only spoken briefly. He had asked insightful questions about data integration architecture, the very architecture I designed for the Westlake acquisition. This was an unexpected variable. If Dr. Mehta remembered our conversation, he might recognize my work in the presentation, creating a potentially awkward situation for Vanessa if she tried to claim full authorship. I added this development to my notes, considering how to navigate the client meeting. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an unknown number. Maya, it's Thomas from legal. Can we talk? Not at the office. Important. Interesting. Thomas had seemed troubled yesterday when I mentioned the documentation discrepancies. Now he wanted a clandestine conversation. Another unexpected development. I responded, tomorrow morning, Reverie Cafe on 7th, 7:30 a.m.? His reply came quickly. See you there? The chessboard was becoming more complex, new pieces entering play. I would need to adapt my strategy accordingly. At home that evening, I reviewed the Catalyst agreement carefully. The terms were exactly as we discussed, with clear milestones and deliverables. Project Renaissance would officially begin the moment Meridian's Westlake implementation showed signs of failure, with a targeted market response ready within 2 weeks of the first reported issues. My role was clearly defined, initially as a consultant providing the correct implementation strategy, then transitioning to VP of Strategic Integration once publicly separated from Meridian. The compensation package was generous, the equity stake substantial, and most importantly, the acknowledgement of my intellectual contribution was guaranteed in writing. I signed the documents, sealing my commitment to the plan. There would be no turning back now. The next morning, I arrived at Reverie Cafe early, selecting the same corner table where I'd met Eliana. Thomas appeared precisely at 7:30, looking nervous and carrying a leather portfolio that he clutched like a shield. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, sliding into the chair opposite mine. "I couldn't discuss this at the office." "What's on your mind, Thomas?" I kept my tone casual, though his obvious anxiety had piqued my curiosity. He glanced around before opening the portfolio and removing several documents. "I've been reviewing the Westlake integration documentation as part of our compliance process. Standard procedure for acquisitions of this size. And?" I prompted when he hesitated. "And I found some irregularities." He pushed a document across the table. "This is the implementation strategy dated 3 weeks ago, with your name as author. And this," he pushed another document forward, "is the official version presented to the board last week, with Vanessa Parker as author." I examined both documents, already knowing what I would find. "They're nearly identical." "Nearly," Thomas agreed. "Except for the authorship and some minor edits to the executive summary. The technical specifications, integration architecture, and implementation timeline are verbatim the same." I looked up at him. "Why are you showing me this, Thomas?" He fidgeted with his coffee cup. "Because it's wrong. And because there's more." He hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. "The board received an anonymous email yesterday raising concerns about the leadership of the Westlake integration, specifically questioning whether the project lead fully understands the technical requirements." Anonymous email. Interesting. Not my doing, which meant someone else had similar concerns. "That sounds like a matter for the board and executive leadership," I said carefully. "It is. Or it would be, if the board wasn't majority controlled by Parker family interests." Thomas looked genuinely troubled. "Maya, I've been at Meridian for 12 years. I've seen how things work. Talent gets overlooked, connections get promoted. But this is different. This is a $50 million acquisition that could define the company's future. If it fails because the wrong person is leading it." He didn't finish the sentence, but his implication was clear. The stakes extended beyond my personal career grievances to the health of the entire company. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Thomas?" He leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm telling you that some of us, people who care about Meridian's future, are watching. And we're concerned." He gathered his documents, returning them to the portfolio. "Just be prepared. Things may change rapidly in the coming weeks." "That's rather cryptic." He stood to leave. "It has to be. But know that not everyone at Meridian is blind to what's happening." He paused. "The client kickoff is Monday. Dr. Mehta from Westlake specifically requested that you lead the technical discussion. He apparently met you at a conference and was impressed by your knowledge of integration architecture. So Dr. Mehta did remember me." Another piece moving on the board. "Vanessa can't be happy about that," I observed. Thomas's smile was grim. "She isn't. But the client's request was too specific to ignore. Richard is spinning it as a collaborative leadership approach." After Thomas left, I remained at the cafe, processing this new information. The board was receiving anonymous concerns. Thomas and others were watching the situation with growing unease. And now a key client was specifically requesting my involvement. The cracks in Vanessa's leadership were appearing faster than anticipated, creating both opportunity and risk. If suspicions about her competence grew too quickly, Richard might replace her with someone more qualified before the implementation began, potentially derailing my plan to expose the flaws during execution. I needed to calibrate my approach. Supportive enough to keep Vanessa in position, but not so supportive that I prevented the inevitable failure. My phone chimed with an email notification from Vanessa. "Prep session for client kickoff, my office, 2 p.m. today. Critical we align on messaging." Perfect timing. An opportunity to gauge her awareness of the growing concerns and to subtly reinforce her confidence despite them. Back at Meridian, the morning passed in a flurry of implementation planning meetings. The team was functioning well, with clear work streams established and technical requirements defined. My role remained advisory rather than directive, exactly the position I needed to monitor without responsibility. At lunch, I received another text from Eliana. "Renaissance progressing. Our team is ready when needed. Quarterly board meeting next week, we'll introduce concept without details. Catalyst was moving forward with their preparations, positioning for the market response when Meridian's implementation faltered. The chess pieces were advancing on both sides of the board. At 2 o'clock, I arrived at Vanessa's office, a glass-walled corner space with views of the city and furnishings that screamed executive privilege. She was on the phone when I entered, her expression tense as she gestured for me to sit. Yes, Dad, I understand the importance. Yes, I know Dr. Mehta requested. I'm meeting with Maya now to prepare. Of course I can handle the technical questions, that's why I'm. Yes. Yes. I will. She hung up, frustration evident in the tight line of her mouth. Everything okay? I asked with practiced concern. She forced a smile. Fine. Just finalizing details for Monday's client meeting. She shuffled some papers on her desk. As you may have heard, Dr. Mehta has specifically requested that you lead the technical portion of the presentation. I met him briefly at a conference last year, I offered. We discussed integration architecture for machine learning platforms. Yes, so I've been told. Her tone was clipped. Multiple times. I remained silent, letting her discomfort fill the space between us. Look, she finally continued, let's be clear about Monday. This is a collaborative presentation. You'll handle the technical details, I'll cover the strategic vision and business outcomes. We present as a unified team, with me as the project lead and you as the technical expert. Understood? Of course, I agreed smoothly. The division of responsibilities makes perfect sense. You focus on the big picture, I'll handle the implementation details. She relaxed slightly, missing the subtle dig. Good. Now, let's review the presentation flow. I've made some adjustments to the slide deck. She pulled up the presentation on her monitor, revealing a heavily modified version of my original technical slides. The complex diagrams had been simplified to the point of meaninglessness, replaced with colorful graphics and vague buzzwords like synergistic integration and optimized pathways. I'm concerned these simplifications might prompt more questions. Then they answer, I said carefully. Dr. Mehta has a strong technical background. He'll expect detailed architecture explanations. Vanessa frowned. It's a kickoff meeting, not a technical deep dive. We need to focus on business outcomes and value proposition. Both are important, I acknowledged. Perhaps we could use the simplified slides for the overview, but have the detailed technical diagrams ready for specific questions? That way we're prepared for whatever direction the conversation takes. She considered this, clearly weighing her limited technical knowledge against the need to appear comprehensive. That makes sense. You'll have the detailed slides ready. To pull up if needed? Absolutely. Good. She seemed relieved. And if technical questions come up that aren't covered in the slides, I'll handle them, I assured her. That's why we're presenting as a team, right? To leverage our complementary strengths. The strategy was working, positioning myself as a supportive resource while subtly emphasizing her dependence on my technical knowledge. She needed me visible for this meeting, which gave me the perfect opportunity to establish my expertise with the client before the implementation problems emerged. We spent the next hour refining the presentation approach, with me gradually steering her back toward more substantive content while maintaining the appearance of supporting her leadership. By the end, we had a workable compromise, simplified overview slides with detailed technical content available as backup. I think we're aligned, Vanessa concluded, sounding more confident. Just remember, we need to present a unified front to the client. No contradictions or technical corrections during the presentation, all right? If you have concerns about something I say, we can discuss it privately afterward. Translation: don't make me look bad by highlighting my technical ignorance. Of course, I agreed. Professional alignment is essential for client confidence. As I left her office, I noticed Richard Parker watching from the hallway again, his expression thoughtful. He was observing the dynamic between Vanessa and me, perhaps recognizing the dependency his daughter was developing on my technical knowledge. A complication, but not an insurmountable one. The weekend passed in careful preparation, reviewing the presentation materials, anticipating questions Dr. Mehta might ask, and updating Eliana on the developing situation at Meridian. By Monday morning, I was ready for what promised to be a pivotal client meeting. The Westlake team arrived precisely at 9, a group of 6 executives led by their CEO, Jennifer Westlake, and CTO, Dr. Mehta. Richard Parker greeted them personally in the lobby, escorting them to the executive conference room where Vanessa waited, perfectly poised in a designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I joined them as they were completing introductions, carrying the laptop that contained both the simplified presentation and the detailed technical backup slides. Dr. Mehta's eyes lit with recognition as he spotted me. Ms. Jindal, excellent. To see you again, he said, extending his hand. Your conference presentation on integration architecture was most illuminating. I'm pleased to see you're involved in this project. Thank you, Dr. Mehta. I'm looking forward to discussing the technical implementation with you today. Vanessa quickly stepped in. Maya is a key member of our integration team. She'll be walking us through the technical architecture while I focus on the strategic business alignment. Dr. Mehta nodded, his expression revealing nothing, though I caught a flicker of interest in his eyes at Vanessa's careful positioning. The meeting began with Richard Parker's overview of the acquisition rationale, followed by Jennifer Westlake's comments on their company's machine learning technology. Then Vanessa took the floor, launching into her strategic vision with practiced confidence. The true value of this integration lies in the synergistic combination of Meridian's data infrastructure with Westlake's predictive algorithms, she explained, clicking through her simplified slides. By creating seamless data pathways between our platforms, we'll enable unprecedented analytical capabilities across multiple market sectors. She continued for 15 minutes, covering business outcomes and market positioning with polished delivery but notably avoiding any specific technical details. The Westlake executives listened attentively, occasionally glancing at Dr. Mehta, who remained expressionless throughout. And now, Vanessa concluded, Maya will walk us through the technical implementation architecture that will make this vision reality. My moment had arrived. I connected my laptop to the presentation system, bringing up the detailed technical slides I'd prepared months ago, the ones Vanessa had attempted to simplify out of existence. Thank you, Vanessa, I began. As Dr. Mehta is aware from our previous discussions, integration architecture for machine learning platforms presents unique challenges, particularly regarding data synchronization and model deployment. I launched into a comprehensive overview of the technical implementation, explaining the complex diagrams with clarity and precision. The Westlake team leaned forward, engaged by the substantive content after Vanessa's high-level generalities. Dr. Mehta began asking pointed questions, which I answered with the confidence that comes from genuine expertise. This three-layer validation approach for data migration is particularly elegant, Dr. Mehta commented, pointing to one of the diagrams. Was this developed specifically for our integration? Yes, I confirmed. The heterogeneous nature of your data structures required a custom validation protocol to maintain referential integrity during migration. He nodded appreciatively. And the bidirectional API framework, this allows real-time model updates without disrupting active analyses? Precisely. By implementing a stateless transaction layer between the analytical engine and the machine learning models, we can push updates without requiring system downtime. The technical discussion continued for 30 minutes, with the Westlake team growing increasingly engaged. Vanessa attempted to interject occasionally with strategic context, but the conversation had clearly shifted to a level of technical detail she couldn't match. By the time we concluded, Dr. Mehta was nodding with satisfaction. This is exactly the kind of technical rigor we hoped to see. The architecture addresses our primary concerns about data integrity and model deployment. Jennifer Westlake turned to Richard Parker. I think our teams are well aligned. The technical foundation seems solid, and the strategic vision is compelling. Richard smiled broadly. Excellent. I believe this partnership will transform both our companies. Vanessa and Maya make a formidable team, combining strategic vision with technical expertise. The meeting adjourned with handshakes and expressions of confidence. As the Westlake executives filed out, Dr. Mehta lingered briefly. Ms. Jindal, I'm impressed by the architecture you've designed. I look forward to working closely with you. During implementation, he handed me his business card. Please feel free to contact me directly with any technical questions or concerns. A direct line to Westlake's CTO, an unexpected advantage that could prove valuable when the implementation began to falter. After the clients departed, Richard Parker gathered Vanessa and me in his office. His expression was satisfied as he closed the door. That went extremely well, he declared. The client is confident, the board will be pleased, and the implementation can proceed on schedule. He turned to Vanessa. Good job managing the presentation flow and strategic messaging. Thank you, Dad, she replied, the brief slip into familial terms revealing her relief. He turned to me. And Maya, excellent technical overview. Dr. Mehta was clearly impressed. Just doing my part for the team, I replied modestly. This is exactly the kind of collaboration we need, Richard continued. Vanessa's leadership, combined with your technical expertise, If you two can maintain this dynamic throughout implementation, this project will be a tremendous success. If only he knew what was coming. As we left his office, Vanessa touched my arm lightly. We made a good impression today. Let's keep this momentum going. Her relief was palpable, crisis averted, position secure, dependent relationship established. Everything proceeding according to plan. Absolutely, I agreed with a smile that revealed nothing of my true intentions. We make quite a team. The implementation phase began with artificial harmony. For 6 weeks, I played my part perfectly. The supportive technical expert, always available to answer questions, to solve problems, to make Vanessa look good in meetings. I documented everything meticulously, every decision, every shortcut, every warning sign ignored. You two are working well together, Richard commented one afternoon, finding me at Vanessa's desk reviewing integration diagrams. His satisfaction was evident, crisis averted, hierarchy preserved, order maintained. What he couldn't see was the digital time bomb ticking beneath the surface of his carefully constructed corporate facade. The flaws I'd embedded in the implementation were subtle but significant, architectural inefficiencies that would only become apparent under the load of real-world data processing. Not catastrophic enough to damage client data, but substantial enough to cripple performance and undermine confidence. Day by day, the implementation progressed according to schedule. The team worked diligently, following the architectural plans. Exactly as documented, including the deliberate flaws that no one but me recognized. Vanessa grew increasingly confident in her leadership role, believing the successful client kickoff had secured her position. Meanwhile, my parallel life at Catalyst was taking shape. Weekly update calls with Eliana kept her team prepared for the coming opportunity. They were developing the corrected implementation strategy, preparing marketing materials, and building the narrative that would position Catalyst as the solution to Meridian's coming failure. The board is intrigued, Eliana told me during one of our secure calls. I've outlined Project Renaissance in general terms, a strategic response to an anticipated market opportunity. They've authorized the necessary resources without knowing the specific target. Perfect, I replied. Plausible deniability is crucial at this stage. How are things progressing at Meridian? Right on schedule. The integration team is implementing exactly as documented. Initial testing looks promising because they're using simplified data sets. The problems won't appear until they attempt full-scale data migration next month. And Vanessa? Increasingly comfortable in her role. She's taking more credit for the architecture, believing the successful implementation validates her leadership. Eliana laughed. Pride before the fall. Exactly. And I've established direct communication with Dr. Mehta at Westlake. He's impressed by the architecture, the parts that actually work, and has requested regular technical updates. That relationship will be invaluable when things unravel, Eliana noted. A direct channel to the client's CTO could accelerate their switch to our solution. The chessboard was set. Pieces were moving precisely as planned. The beginning of the end. I arrived at the meeting precisely on time, taking a seat at the back as Martin displayed performance graphs on the main screen. The downward curves told the story clearly, the system couldn't handle the load it was designed for. We're seeing critical bottlenecks in the data migration pathways, Martin explained, pointing to a particularly steep performance drop. The architecture specified parallel processing for initial loading, but the validation layers are creating deadlocks under high volume. Vanessa, at the head of the table, looked increasingly concerned as Martin detailed the technical issues. These were precisely the flaws I'd built into the design, subtle enough to pass initial review but fundamental enough to cripple performance at scale. Could this be a configuration issue? Vanessa asked, reaching for the simplest explanation. Perhaps we need to adjust server resources? Martin shook his head. We've already tried increasing memory and processing power. The bottlenecks persist. This appears to be an architectural issue in the data pathway design. All eyes turned to me, the technical expert, the architect of the system now showing its flaws. I maintained a perfect mask of professional concern. Let me review the validation protocols. There may be an optimization opportunity we didn't account for in the original design. How long will that take? Vanessa asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. The full migration is scheduled to begin next week. The client is expecting progress reports. I'll need at least 2 days to properly analyze the performance data and identify potential solutions, I replied, knowing that no quick fix existed for the architectural flaws I deliberately created. 2 days? Vanessa's voice rose slightly. We don't have 2 days. The board is reviewing project status tomorrow. Technical problems can't be solved by management deadlines, Martin interjected, earning a sharp look from Vanessa. We need To understand the root cause before we can implement effective solutions. Fine, Vanessa conceded. Maya, prioritize this analysis. I need preliminary findings for the board meeting tomorrow. Martin, try increasing the server allocation again. Maybe we just haven't hit the right configuration yet. A futile directive, but exactly what I'd anticipated. Vanessa was falling back on management cliches rather than understanding the technical problem. Throw more resources at it, demand faster analysis, maintain the illusion of control. The meeting adjourned with a sense of urgency that would soon evolve into panic. As everyone filed out, Vanessa caught my arm. Fix this, she whispered, her confident facade cracking. Whatever it takes. My father can't hear about performance issues tomorrow. I'll do my best, I promised, the lie smooth after weeks of practice. Back at my desk, I opened the performance logs and began a show of analysis, taking screenshots and notes that would document my apparent efforts to solve the unsolvable problem. Occasionally, I sent update emails to the team with technical jargon that sounded promising but led nowhere. Meanwhile, I sent a secure message to Eliana, first cracks appearing. Performance issues during scaled testing. Exactly as predicted. Her response came quickly, Renaissance team on standby. Keep me updated on escalation timeline. The next morning, Richard Parker called an emergency meeting of the Westlake implementation leadership team. His expression was grave as we gathered in the executive conference room. The board has concerns, he began without preamble. Performance testing results were included in yesterday's status report. 47% degradation is unacceptable. For a production system. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. We're addressing the issue, Dad. Maya is analyzing the validation protocols, and we've increased server resources to compensate in the short term. Richard turned to me. What have you found? I projected appropriate professional concern. The architecture is experiencing deadlocks during concurrent data processing. The validation layers are creating bottlenecks that additional server resources can't resolve. We need to reconsider the fundamental approach to data migration. Meaning what, exactly? Richard demanded. Meaning we may need to redesign significant portions of the integration architecture. The current approach won't scale to production volumes. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Redesigning the architecture meant delays, additional costs, and potential client dissatisfaction. Richard's jaw tightened. How long would a redesign take? At least 3 weeks for design and implementation, plus additional testing time, I replied, knowing the estimate would send shockwaves through the leadership team. 3 weeks? Vanessa's voice rose in alarm. That would put us a month behind schedule. The client is expecting preliminary results next week. Would you rather deliver a system that fails under load? I countered. The performance issues will only worsen with full production data. Richard looked between us, his expression hardening. This is unacceptable. The board was assured this implementation was on track. Now you're telling me we need to start over? Not start over, I clarified. Redesign specific components that aren't performing as expected. Components you designed, Vanessa said quietly, the first hint of blame entering her voice. I met her gaze steadily. Components I designed according to the specifications provided, yes. But implementation testing often reveals unforeseen complications. Richard cut in before the blame game could escalate. I don't care who designed what. I care about solutions. Maya, begin the redesign immediately. Vanessa, you'll need to manage client expectations about the timeline. And I want daily progress reports from both of you. As the meeting dispersed, I noticed Thomas from legal lingering by the door, his expression troubled. He caught my eye. Briefly before turning away, another sign that concerns were spreading beyond the immediate implementation team. Back at my desk, I began the redesign process, creating complex technical documents that appeared to address the performance issues while actually introducing additional complications that wouldn't be apparent until implementation. A house of cards designed to collapse at the perfect moment. Meanwhile, Vanessa was tasked with delivering the bad news to Westlake. I wasn't invited to that call, but I didn't need to be. Dr. Mehta contacted me directly afterward. Ms. Jindal, I just spoke with Ms. Parker about the performance issues, his message began. I'm concerned by the vague explanation provided. Could you give me a more technical assessment of what's happening and the proposed solution? The direct channel I'd cultivated was proving its value already. I responded with a detailed technical explanation, positioning myself as transparent and thorough while Vanessa had been evasive and superficial. I appreciate your candor, Dr. Mehta replied. This is concerning, but at least now I understand the technical challenges. Please keep me updated on the redesign progress. Another piece moving into position on the board. The next 2 weeks were a carefully orchestrated dance of apparent progress and hidden sabotage. I produced redesign documents that looked comprehensive, but contained subtle flaws that would only become apparent during implementation. Vanessa, increasingly desperate to show progress, pushed the team to implement my solutions without adequate review. Richard Parker became a more frequent presence in our area, checking in daily on the redesign progress. His confidence in Vanessa was visibly eroding as the technical challenges mounted. The board is losing patience, he told us during one tense update meeting. This project represents a significant portion of our projected annual growth. Failure is not an option. The pressure was taking its toll on Vanessa. Her polished appearance began to fray, dark circles under her eyes, wrinkled clothing, repeated outbursts of frustration during team meetings. The composed executive was crumbling under the weight of technical problems she couldn't understand, much less solve. Thomas from legal began appearing at technical review meetings, taking copious notes and asking pointed questions about documentation and decision trails. The company was building its defense for the inevitable fallout. 17 days into the redesign process, the second wave of failures began. The updated architecture, now implemented in the test environment, was showing new performance issues, different symptoms but equally devastating impact. Data corruption during concurrent transactions, Martin reported grimly during the morning. Stand up. The new validation protocols are creating inconsistent states in the shared data objects. Vanessa's face went pale. Corruption? As in, we're losing data? Not losing, Martin clarified. Corrupting. Values are being overwritten with inconsistent versions during processing. That's worse than performance issues, one of the engineers noted. We can't deploy a system that corrupts data. All eyes turned to me again, the architect of both the original flawed design and the equally flawed redesign. I'll need to review the transaction logging, I said, frowning with manufactured concern. This shouldn't be happening with the isolation levels we specified. Well, it is happening, Vanessa snapped, her composure finally breaking. Fix it. Now. The team dispersed with a sense of impending disaster. I returned to my desk, making a show of intense analysis while secretly documenting the escalating crisis for Project Renaissance. That afternoon, I received an unexpected message from Richard Parker, my office, 4 p.m. Come alone. A summons from the CEO was rarely good news, especially in the midst of a project meltdown. I spent the intervening hours preparing for various scenarios, accusations, bargaining, threats, even termination. Whatever happened, I needed to maintain my position long enough to see the final phase of my plan unfold. At precisely 4 p.m., I knocked on Richard's office door. Come in, Maya. He called, his voice weary. I entered to find him alone, standing by the window overlooking the city. He looked older than he had just weeks ago, the Westlake debacle etching new lines into his face. Close the door, he instructed without turning. I complied, then waited silently for him to speak. Do you know what the board discussed this morning? He finally asked, still gazing out the window. I imagine the Westlake implementation issues were on the agenda, I replied neutrally. He turned to face me. The board is considering removing Vanessa as project lead. The statement hung in the air between us. I kept my expression carefully neutral, though inside I felt a surge of vindication. The plan was working exactly as designed. I see, I said when he didn't continue. Dr. Mehta from Westlake specifically requested that you take over technical leadership. He said, and I quote, Ms. Jindal's understanding of the architecture is clearly superior, and we have more confidence in her ability to resolve the current issues. I remained silent, letting Richard work through whatever he was struggling to say. The board is inclined to agree with him, he continued reluctantly. The technical problems have created significant concern about project leadership. What are you asking me, Mr. Parker? I prompted when he fell silent again. He sighed heavily. I'm asking for your assessment. Honestly. Is Vanessa out of her depth on this project? A pivotal moment. My answer could accelerate Vanessa's removal or buy her more time. Strategically, I needed her to remain in nominal control just long enough for the full extent of the failure to become apparent. Vanessa has strong strategic vision, I began diplomatically. But this implementation has revealed gaps in her technical knowledge that are creating challenges. That said, completely changing leadership mid-project could create additional disruption. Richard nodded slowly. What would you recommend? A compromise, I suggested. Officially elevate me to technical director with authority over the implementation architecture, while Vanessa maintains her role as executive lead focusing on client communication and strategic alignment. This addresses Dr. Mehta's concerns without a complete leadership change. He considered this, clearly. torn between protecting his daughter and salvaging the failing project. The board might accept that arrangement. Temporary technical leadership to address the current crisis. I'm willing to step into that role if it helps the project succeed, I offered, the perfect image of corporate loyalty. Richard studied me thoughtfully. You know, Maya, I've underestimated you. Your technical skills are exceptional, and your professionalism during this crisis has been impressive. Perhaps we should have recognized your capabilities sooner. Better late than never, I replied with a small smile. Indeed. He turned back to the window briefly, then faced me again with renewed resolve. I'll propose this arrangement to the board tomorrow. In the meantime, begin preparing a comprehensive assessment of the current technical issues and your proposed solutions. If you're taking technical leadership, you'll need to hit the ground running. I'll have it ready by morning, I promised. As I left his office, I sent a secure message to Eliana, acceleration. Being promoted to technical director to fix the crisis. Perfect positioning for the final phase. Her response was immediate, Renaissance team ready. Market positioning materials prepared. How soon? 2 weeks maximum, I replied. The system is already failing in new and spectacular ways. Full production migration will be the final nail. That evening, I worked late preparing the technical assessment Richard had requested. Not a genuine solution, that would defeat my purpose, but a compelling analysis that would appear thorough while actually setting the stage for the final catastrophic failure. The next morning, I received official notification of my promotion to technical director for the Westlake implementation. The carefully worded announcement emphasized the expanded leadership team approach, positioning the change as an enhancement rather than a demotion for Vanessa. She was waiting at my desk when I arrived, her expression a complex mixture of resentment and desperation. Congratulations on your promotion, she said, the words stiff with suppressed anger. I guess technical problems have their silver linings. I'm just trying to help the project succeed, I replied mildly. We're still a team, Vanessa. Are we? She leaned closer, lowering her voice. Because it seems awfully convenient that the architecture you designed is failing at exactly the moment when leadership changes would benefit your career. A dangerous accusation, but one she couldn't prove and wouldn't dare make publicly without evidence. Technical problems are part of complex implementations, I said calmly. I'm as frustrated by these issues as you are. I'm sure. Her smile was brittle. Just remember, my father may have given you technical authority, but I'm still the executive lead. All client communication goes through me. Of course, I agreed, knowing her insistence on controlling the narrative would only accelerate her downfall when the final failure occurred. The next week passed in a blur of technical meetings, status reports, and escalating system failures. Each solution I implemented addressed surface symptoms while leaving the fundamental architectural flaws intact. The team worked tirelessly, following my directions exactly, unaware they were building a system designed to fail. Richard Parker attended daily status meetings, his concern evident as each day brought new technical challenges. The board was growing increasingly alarmed, with some members suggesting the entire project be paused for comprehensive reassessment. Vanessa clung desperately to her executive lead title, sending positive updates to the client that contradicted the technical reality. The disconnect between her communications and the actual project status was creating dangerous expectations that would make the eventual failure even more dramatic. Then came the moment I'd been carefully orchestrating for months. Full production. Migration began on a Tuesday morning. The system immediately showed signs of stress, processing bottlenecks, data synchronization errors, validation failures. By noon, the migration had slowed to a crawl. By 3 o'clock, it had halted completely amid escalating data corruption alerts. The implementation team worked frantically to resolve the cascading failures, following my directions with increasing desperation. I maintained a facade of determined problem-solving while documenting every failed attempt, every system error, every moment of the unfolding disaster. At 5:47 p.m., Martin made the call everyone had been dreading: we need to abort the migration. The corruption risk is too high to continue. An emergency meeting was convened in the executive conference room. Richard Parker sat at the head of the table, his expression grim. Vanessa sat beside him, pale and silent. Thomas from legal was present, along with 2 board members who had been called in for the crisis. Give me the unvarnished truth, Richard demanded as the team assembled. Where do we stand? Martin went first, his technical assessment brutally honest. The integration architecture has fundamental flaws that prevent scaling to production volumes. Data integrity cannot be maintained under concurrent processing loads. In simple terms, the system doesn't work and can't be made to work without comprehensive redesign. How comprehensive? One of the board members asked. We're talking about starting over, Martin replied bluntly. The current architecture cannot be salvaged. All eyes turned to me, the technical director now responsible for the failing system. Is that your assessment as well, Maya? Richard asked, his voice strained. This was the moment of truth, the culmination of months of careful planning and patient execution. The current implementation has revealed architectural incompatibilities between our data infrastructure and Westlake's machine learning platform that weren't apparent during initial design. I began, choosing my words carefully. The system as currently architected cannot achieve the performance and reliability requirements for production deployment. So we've wasted 6 months and millions of dollars, the other board member stated flatly. The initial approach was flawed, I acknowledged. But we've gained valuable insights into the integration challenges that would inform a more successful implementation. Who designed this flawed architecture? The first board member asked, looking between Vanessa and me. The trap was set. If Vanessa claimed credit for the architecture to maintain her leadership position, she would own the failure. If she blamed me, she would contradict months of presentations where she had positioned herself as the strategic visionary behind the implementation. The integration architecture evolved through collaborative development, I said before Vanessa could respond. But as technical director, I take responsibility for the current technical challenges. A calculated risk, appearing to accept blame while actually reinforcing my technical authority and positioning myself as the honorable professional willing to take responsibility. The question isn't who's to blame, Richard interjected, clearly trying to protect both Vanessa and the project. The question is how we move forward. What options do we have? We have 3 choices, I said, seizing control of the narrative. First, we can attempt incremental fixes to the current architecture, which would take months with no guarantee of success. Second, we can start over with a completely new design approach, which would reset the timeline by at least 6 months. Or third, we can consider alternative implementation strategies that might leverage different technical frameworks. Alternative strategies? Richard looked interested despite his obvious frustration. What did you have in mind? I've been researching potential solutions since the performance issues first appeared, I explained. There are emerging architectural approaches that might better accommodate the specific challenges we're facing. I'd like permission to explore these options before we commit to a complete restart. How long would that exploration take? One of the board members asked. I can have a preliminary assessment in 3 days, I promised, knowing that project Renaissance was already fully developed and waiting for deployment. Richard looked around the table, gauging reactions. 3 days of research seems reasonable before making a major decision. Maya, prepare your assessment of alternative approaches. In the meantime, we need to manage client expectations. He turned to Vanessa. Schedule a call with Westlake for tomorrow morning. We need to be transparent about the challenges we're facing. Vanessa nodded silently, her career visibly crumbling before her eyes. As the meeting adjourned, I sent a final message to Eliana, system failure confirmed. Complete redesign required. Renaissance launches in 3 days. Her response was immediate and triumphant. Board approved full launch resources. Press release drafted. Prepare for your grand entrance. The chess game was entering its final phase. In 3 days, I would present my alternative implementation strategy, actually the correct architecture I'd developed with Catalyst. When Meridian inevitably rejected it in favor of their own internal solution, I would resign and immediately join Catalyst as VP of Strategic Integration, bringing the correct implementation directly to Westlake. The board that had rejected me 8 times was about to discover exactly what they had lost, and what it would cost them to have overlooked the woman who would now dismantle their most important client relationship. As I gathered my things to leave, I passed Vanessa's office. She sat alone in the darkened space, staring at her computer screen where the project status dashboard displayed a sea of red alerts. Her carefully constructed facade of executive competence had crumbled, revealing the truth that had been there all along. She had been promoted far beyond her capabilities, protected by a system designed to elevate privilege over merit. In that moment, I felt no satisfaction in her distress, only renewed determination to create a different kind of company with Eliana, one where talent and innovation were recognized regardless of connections or pedigree. The system wasn't just broken. It was designed to be broken. And sometimes, the only way to fix a fundamentally flawed system is to rebuild it from the ground up. Which is exactly what I intended to do. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.